Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen Ape, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers from the Council of Socialist Ents, here's an author, blogger, political columnist and part-time folk singer, Comrade Chris Trotter. And he is a speechwriter, founding member of the Devonport Militia, militant cyclist and pithy tweeter, David Slack. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, Issue 1, the First Leaders Debate and Week 2 of the 2011 election campaign. Who is winning so far? Issue 2, Paula Bennett's welfare reforms. No one ever lost votes bashing dirty, filthy bennies. Issue 3 tonight, Epsom. What the hell is going on? Will Banks lose? And if he does, what are the impacts? And we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off with Issue 1. The First Leaders Debate on TVNZ was watched by just under 1 million viewers, with one of the highest voter rates in the OECD. Let's not pretend New Zealanders aren't interested in politics. How did the Leaders Debate go? And where are we at Week 2 of the 2011 election campaign? David, Gough had been written off by the right-wing attack blogs. He was the underdog. He held his own in the debate, and National Party cheerleader John Armstrong wrote in the Herald this week that David Farrar's 21% meltdown of the Labour Party fantasy won't happen because of Gough's strong performance. But was it enough?
It helped. It helped, although it was a woeful debate. I was actually involved in an alternative one at the very time.
The Green Room, brilliant,
and
very
I
well
think
done.
that was a very a far superior example of how you should be canvassing political issues.
Finlay McDonald, very good.
He was. And then last night we had a much better example of how you do a debate, because you need time. And the press did it. They had a webcast that was excellent and ran for about 2 hours, and you really did get a real exposition of the not only the policies but also the leaders. And I really thought it was very worthwhile. All of which amounts to saying, no, that debate wasn't enough, but they do have momentum, and I think they have done an awful lot right so far this campaign. There is this need for Phil to be able to demonstrate that he's got a bloodied head. You know, he didn't do it at the time of the succession, and at some point you need to have a leader showing that, so that people say, you're pretty good, you are. Having said all that, though, you know, I think their strategy of looking at policy rather more than leadership is bloody good. I applaud it. You know, for it's desirable that we talk about what's wrong with the economy and why things need to change, and an emphasis on policy will get you that. We need to be talking about what a capital gains tax means. We need to be talking about why the way the economy runs at the moment is just spinning our wheels, essentially. And when you boil it all down, for all that the Nats will tell you they've been competent managers, they're essentially saying, we're relying on the insurance check coming in from overseas to give us growth. That's pathetic.
1 to 10 being the highest. How appalling was TVNZ debate?
Out of 10?
Yeah, give me out of 10.
No, I have to go into negatives.
Really?
I think it was a travesty, and it really dismays me to see that this is your bully pulpit, your TV1. This is where all the viewers are. And we've seen many elections now where they've had many ways of slicing and dicing it, but essentially what you need is enough time to hear the leaders speak and traverse the issues and give you something to get hold of. And what they're doing now is just some kind of MasterChef bastardization where now they have commentary as it goes, for God's sake.
I actually thought Wallace Chapman was the highlight. He should have been hosting. Chris, John Key's default setting seems to be meh to almost every issue on the planet. He is so laid back, he's horizontal. New Zealanders love his casual, easygoing nature. Against that Teflon, Labour have nowhere to fight this election, do they?
Well, they are fighting it on the basis of policy. However, I would say this: if you are presenting yourself, as Phil is, as a political leader willing to make the difficult decisions, to opt for the hard choices, and to present yourself as someone who is competent and realistic. When someone asks you to show them the money,
you got to kind of show, right?
Got to be able to show them the money. Phil ran slap bang into that question.
That's
Key, who is vastly underestimated as a performer
Yep.
by the Labour Party.
Yep.
They can't quite believe that this commercially driven kind of politics light guy is really in their league, and he is in their league, and you could see it last night. I watched Phil, and it struck me that Phil, at his core, his personal core, I think is quite a shy person. And so when he's up in front
Quite
of a
modest,
crowd,
isn't he? He's actually quite modest.
yes,
Yeah.
and when he's up in front of a crowd or when he's in front of the TV cameras, I think he puts so much energy into the presentation of himself and his ideas that he is in a way deaf to the situation around him, particularly when it's a crowd.
Right. Yep. Yep.
And what we saw last night was Phil holding on rigidly to the lectern, trying to keep it all together. Whereas Key, you know, as Bill English said, bounces from cloud to cloud.
He does.
He is so confident in himself
Yeah.
that he is able to pick up the energy from the audience. He is able to make that connection with his audience.
He feeds on it, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah.
And it pumped him up last night to the point where, you know, Phil would have been very glad to hear that final bell because he was being knocked all around the ring, frankly.
Yeah.
It was astonishing to me. You know, I was expecting that when he was waffling for a moment or two, I thought, well, we're going to hear this rebuttal any moment now. Here it comes. Here it comes. Here it comes.
Ooh,
Where is it? And it was astonishing.
Yeah.
And I hope to God they've got this vaunted spreadsheet.
Better work.
Better work,
I
right,
want to
yep,
see it.
yep.
And I do hope that they're not fudging this because of the fact that CGT takes a while to click in, because I don't think that's necessarily something to be ashamed of.
Right,
You're
yep.
actually recalibrating the economy
Yeah,
when
you're
you bring
restructuring,
your
right? Yeah,
CGT
yeah.
in. It means that everybody does pay their fair share, and there is a substantial stream to be brought from it.
Yep.
Also, of course, it reorients the economy because it turns it towards investment and away from housing, which is what we squandered so much on in the last 10 years.
The lenders of the world and the credit rating agencies, seeing a commitment to something like a capital gains tax, knowing because they've seen the implementation of one in South Africa where it is now returning billions of dollars every year, they will know, well, these guys will have an income stream 5 years out.
We can lend you the money.
You know, that's right. They know that because this is a sovereign debt. This isn't you and I asking.
No. This is the government, right?
Yeah. You know, where people would demand a fairly large amount of collateral, I think it's fair to say. But no, this is a sovereign debt. This is a country. Countries are immortal. I mean, you can afford to look 10 years down the track. So why they've engaged in this pissing contest with National about, you know, who's
paying
gonna,
off by 2014.
Yeah, who's going to get to pay
David,
off day
show
first.
me the money is John Key's new one-liner. Now he's used up spending like a drunken sailor. If we are talking economic competence, perhaps John could show us where the double credit downgrade and $18 billion deficit blown out by raising GST for tax cuts to the rich came from. But that context is never explored, leaving Key with the laughs. Style trumps substance, doesn't it?
Yes, I think it does. Although Chris is right, you know, essentially Labour's reading him wrong because he brings a gun to a knife fight.
Yeah.
And he was very skillful at it last night. He does know the numbers, and he can say it's this much for raising it to 39%, and it's this much for taking off the GST, and he knows them well. But they should too. On the larger scale numbers, they should know them, and they should be able to rebut them. And you're quite right. They have squandered these last 3 years. They've done by tinkering so little. You know, they're too scared to do anything bold, and their real problem. And I've been saying this from the day they were elected, that I think they'll be remembered in the end not for what they did, but for what they failed to do. Their problem is they're frightened of difference or change. They only know what's familiar, so they go on building roads instead of public transport. They go on.
They have, however. And that's what that $18,000 million represents.
18 billion. Yeah.
They have gone on spending.
Oh yeah.
They are Keynesians. At heart, right? We are all Keynesians now.
Now, that's right.
And their great trick has been to behave like a bunch of orthodox Keynesians without being called for,
Right.
without the right getting on its hind legs and screaming.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's quite an achievement in itself.
They're in the whorehouse, but we're still wearing the vicar's collar.
That's right.
That's right.
And everybody says more tea, vicar.
That's right. I can see now, Martin, why Jim Anderton, when he launched the New Labour Party,
Yep.
hired economists like Petra Simons
Yep.
and John Lepper to nut out an alternative budget. So when they made the promises,
They always had the
when they
figures,
said we'll
always had
buy
the
back
figures.
all the
Yep.
assets,
Yep.
they could show people how they would do it. It is an absolutely invaluable
Chris,
thing to have.
you brilliantly created a voter profile in 2008 called the Waitakere Man. He was the new middle-class voter for Labour, and you argued how Labour had run afoul of him and his partner. What is Waitakere Man thinking in 2011?
I think he's yet to be convinced. If he or she was watching the opening broadcasts, and quite a few people did.
That's right. Yeah, just under a million.
A
Just under a million.
surprising number
Yeah.
did. I think Waitakere man and Waitakere woman would have felt the cockles of their heart heating up, because that really was a pitch at native-born Labour families, and I mean that. Families that have voted Labour since Adam was a pup, as Norman Kirk used to say, and who perhaps stopped voting Labour either in 05 or 08. That was an important message. Now, for them to do more than say, well, I'm glad they're no longer talking about smacking, that's an improvement on that. For them to move on from saying that to, bloody hell, you know, I'm looking at Phil Goff in a different way now.
Right.
And you know, you've got to hand it to them. They've got a pretty good program out there, and they've costed it. Well, they're not saying that,
Right.
because A, they haven't costed it, and B, they're probably not entirely sure that the program's coherent yet. So in the next 2 weeks, those are the challenges.
Question to both of you. Who of the minor parties is impressed? Greens, United Future, New Zealand First, ACT, Māori Party, Mana, or Conservative Party? Who's impressed?
Greens enormously. They're doing everything right.
Yep.
And that green room on a Monday night that I was
Smart.
involved in
Very smart, wasn't it?
Gave me quite an insight into them as well, and just how enthusiastic they are and imaginative they are. They're making a real impact, and I think it's. I said last time they'd get 10%, and they didn't. So I'll say they'll get 15% this time. They'll probably get 10.
Who's impressing?
Well, I would have to say the Greens have mounted a very effective campaign. What I think Russell Norman particularly, and some of the people in the back room, as it were, have realised is that, as in Australia, as in the United States, elections are won and lost in the suburbs.
Yep.
That's the brute truth of it. They're not won or lost in the State House ghettos. They're not won or lost in Remuera or Kandala.
Yep.
They're won in middle New Zealand's suburban tracts. And Russell is pitching at suburban New Zealand.
Yep.
And it's paying dividends. The other person I would single out, though, particularly after his performance on Radio New Zealand National yesterday, is Hone Harawira.
Yeah.
That guy is maturing as a political leader before our eyes.
Yes.
And he has got a true Maori orator's facility with words and with images. The way he said, we've got to feed the kids. How do we do that? It's going to cost 38 million. We're paying 40 million to keep people in Afghanistan. We'll feed the kids by bringing the boys home.
Yeah, that's very good.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Just
yeah. He's having an impact on the Māori electorates. Thank you, panel. Moving on to issue 2. Sending solo mothers back to work once their second child turns 1 and forcing the sick and mentally unwell back to job seeking. Paula Bennett's latest attack on beneficiaries in this week's welfare reform policy lacked the bite of the welfare raiser gang's suggested night of the long sticks, but many have argued that the changes are more posturing than real punitive cuts. David, you never lose votes by putting the boot into those on welfare, but the changes, as difficult as they will be to those facing them, won't be thought of as too extreme by the majority of voters. John Kerr's got this one right, hasn't he?
Well, you could certainly see how they're thinking in the opening address on Friday night. They giving his answers to the patsy questions. When they got to the one about, they had somebody who stood up and her words were about people sitting on the dole. It's always phrased that way, sitting on the dole, because of course they are, to a man and a woman, bone idle.
All lazy,
right.
those bludgers.
I mean, for God's sake, if there were 3 red-headed people in the All Blacks, you wouldn't say the All Blacks are gingers.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, we know that there are shirkers amongst people on the dole. It doesn't mean... Anyway, I digress.
That's right. Yeah.
When he gave his response to that and said there'll be a card so that they can't be spending it on cigarette and alcohol, this murmur of approving, purse-lipped contentment rippled through that room, and it was unedifying to see, but it was also it reinforced everything you knew about the intolerance that sits behind this kind of policy. You're dead right. It's way more about posturing than it is about genuine policy. And it's also true that, like Chris said, you know, they are Keynesians, and they are timid, and they simply want to package it a little differently, more than they want to change policy substantially.
Chris, in 2008, the National Party did a huge song and dance routine about the politically correct nanny state dichocacy of Helen Grade. Help me out here. How is the state intervening directly into the spending abilities of young beneficiaries, not the most astounding invasion of the state directly into people's lives? Isn't this nanny state on steroids with a submachine gun?
Yes, but as I've said to you, I think before on this program, Marvin, New Zealanders have a rather interesting relationship with nanny.
Yeah, don't they?
There are days when nanny says take your medicine and they go no, won't, don't like it, go away, hate you. And there are other days where nanny says quick, come away from that nasty man, and they go nanny. And so you've always got to keep that in mind. Right. What I can't understand are the numbers in this policy. They say that they have 130 million taken from spending elsewhere. Now, my strong suspicion is that all that money represents is the money they were already spending on pretty much identical policies given a new name, because the welfare benefits themselves have been renamed. I'm told that there is only $50 million in new money. That's money that wasn't already been spent. So rather than the money being churned, this is actually money being put in. Now we're talking about 4 years, getting 46,000 people off the dole over 4 years, so that's what, 11,000 odd people a year. You're talking about what, 12.5 million out of that 50, unless they're planning to spend an extra 50 million a year, which would then be what, 200 million, which I don't think they are planning to do. So that's only what, 12.5 million divided into 11,400 or something. It's only just under $1,100 per person. Are all those things they're promising, which John Key alluded to in that opening address? You know, we're going to have proper case management. We're going to have proper training. We're going to have wonderful childcare facilities. We're going to have this card to save them from themselves. Are you going to be able to provide all of that for just $1,100?
It's a hell of a stretch of the money. David, we have 200,000 children in poverty. Food parcels have doubled this year. And a New Zealand statistics report out this week showed nearly half of New Zealanders struggling to pay for the basics. How do these welfare reforms tackle that level of poverty?
Well, they really don't. And the thing we haven't mentioned yet, but we because I think we just take it as a given, is that there are precious few jobs to go to that would solve all of this. And that's the point I was making earlier on about needing to recalibrate the economy. You know, just spending more in a Keynesian way, but pretending you're not, but not changing your structure in any way, isn't going to take you very far. And this is where that capital gains tax becomes quite important, because if it shifts investment towards more productive activity, that's where your jobs are going to come from. Sure. And there are other means that will deliver them as well, like R&D, and that's, again, this is what Labor and the Greens are talking about, and clean tech that the Greens are talking about. But from this government, they actually have this thing called an economic growth agenda, and they've been piss poor, if I might say so, at conveying this thing. That's laudable, although when you look at it, essentially what they're saying is it will be cutting out red tape and boosting infrastructure, which is generally code for more roads for Stephen. So it doesn't actually get you a very long way along. But you've got to get the jobs. You've got to get the jobs because until you do, that poverty will remain.
Chris, Paula Bennett acknowledged this week that the changes announced have no basis in research evidence. Should we be passing social policy with no basis in research evidence?
Evidence. We're talking about the National Party.
Okay.
The only sort of evidence that really counts at National Party dinner parties is anecdotal evidence.
Question to both of you. Treasury is suggesting 5.8% unemployment next year. I'm predicting over 6.2%. And with Greece imploding, the global market's in for another bit of a meltdown. Where are the jobs for all these welfare recipients who are about to force into work? Where are they?
Well, as I was saying, unless you make those changes and get new industry going, they aren't going to be forthcoming.
Look,
where are the jobs?
John Key is used to thinking about economics in global terms. I mean, that's
his
how
thing.
he made
He's a first international
That's how he
Prime
made his.
Minister.
That's how he made his millions. I think the National Party are betting the whole country essentially on China continuing to grow.
Really?
On China not stumbling, on India continuing to expand its middle class, and on New Zealand simply doing what New Zealand has always done, which is putting high quality food on the tables of whichever large imperial power
Would like to buy it.
happen to put their hand up for it.
Final question to both of you. Help me out here. How is sending mothers out to work so that the state can subsidise someone else to look after their children economically viable? Because even if solo mothers work 15 hours a week, which is what their expectation is, they still miss out on the work-based tax credits for their children of at least $60 a week.
That's right. That's right. And I think what isn't being said in relation to the government's welfare policy is that the real intention is to simply get people off the rolls. That's its
it,
real
isn't it?
intention.
That's it.
And that is what has been done in places like Wisconsin, the famous Wisconsin
That's
Works. Right. It wasn't so much that unemployed people or solo mothers were put into work and lived happily ever after.
That wasn't the point.
It was a case of their lives being made so difficult and the rules becoming so arcane that they simply, and I believe quite deliberately, were pushed through the cracks and fell God knows where.
Yes, I think that's a very plausible analysis. And in a way, our whole economy depends on people in other parts of the world not enjoying the welfare support they have here. You know, all the clothes we have and the equipment we have in every room of our house comes from somebody who earns a pittance in China. But for that, we wouldn't have the standard of living we enjoy. And when you push people out of that first world economy, you make it that little easier to breathe.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight, Epsom. What the hell? If I told you 6 months ago that ACT might lose Epsom, Chris Trotter would have laughed. In fact, I think that's exactly what happened. The idea that Rodney's massive majority could be challenged in any way, shape or form seemed like a communist fantasy. But the latest polls out of Epsom see Banks trailing well behind his autobiographer. David, when does John Key directly tell the voters of Epsom to cut out the silly buggers, do what he's telling them, and vote for John Banks?
No, clearly he's not going to.
Really?
It's beautiful comedy, this whole thing, and for all. You never know from one day to the next. Is Don Brash, is he Dr. Evil, is he Mr. Magoo? John Banks is now several years past his
use by date.
Well, yeah, it's about 3 elections past where he should have been, and he's behaving so strangely and so robotically that this whole package being presented to the good people of Epsom is so bizarre that I can't see how John, even that nice Mr. Key telling them to do it, will make it palatable for them.
Chris, I put to you again the point I made 6 months ago. Rodney, for all his faults, and there were many, he had charm. John Banks has all the charm of a road accident involving a busload of children. What is happening in Epsom?
Yikes.
I think it must be the only case in recent history where Dr. Johnson has been beaten by Boswell. The biographer is ahead of the subject, which really isn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether the electors of Epsom are about to say enough is enough, frankly. The way in which ACT has been, picked up, shaken, hurled into a wall, picked up again, stomped on from a great height, and then the poor limp wreck that remains has been propped up and a little vote for me has been put in front of it. I'm just not sure that Epsomites, if there is such a word, are going to vote for this battered, bruised, bloodied wreck of a party, especially when its front person one is Spurs under Sir Robert Muldoon, which is a goodly period of time away now.
We're going to wrap it. David, your final word this week is?
Oh, final word, gosh. Well, actually, I'll throw in something because you've just reminded me, Chris, that is probably worth reminding people about with the long heritage of John Banks, and that is, as a police minister, he was bizarre in the extreme. Actually, no, when he was a spokesman beforehand, he, excuse me, reputedly had many crime scene photos in his desk that he would pull out and show to you if you were to if as a journalist you were to prompt him about it. He fell out with his whole cabinet. He was all but a pariah in that party, and this is who the voters of Epsom must hold their nose and send back another time. I somewhat doubt it.
Chris Trotter, your final word this week is?
Well, I just want to reiterate again how impressed I have been with the utterances of Hone Harawira. The man had a very bad reputation, much of it, I have to say, deserved, given some of the ridiculous things he had said and done. But it is always pleasing to watch a political leader mature. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the transformation of both, Norm Kirk from big roly-poly man to the man who ran up the steps and captured the mood, and the same thing happened to David Longy, and I think we're seeing this with Hone Harawira. If he manages to hold on to Te Tai Tokerau, may be a man to watch in the future.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. The latest Benny Bash by National is pure evil Machiavellian genius. The working poor hate beneficiaries with the sort of visceral hatred racists have towards people of a different race. Rather than blame the low-wage economy caused by the right-wing dismantling of unions, the working poor are focused on beneficiaries earning slightly less than them, who in their mind's eye don't work as hard as they do just to make ends meet. What is brilliant about Benny bashing by National is that it feeds on that visceral hatred, so much so that the working poor end up supporting the National Party. The irony, of course, is that the National Party represent the bankers, the farmers and the elites of New Zealand. Their policy of enriching the rich at the cost of everyone else is 1000% contrary to the interests of the working poor. But by playing to their lesser angels, the working poor become blinded to the ultimate consequences to them of National Party policy. Divide and rule has always been the weapon of choice for the undemocratic. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.